I remember the cold. That's what always comes back first. Not just the weather. It was early November in Chicago. But the chill in my mother's eyes when she pulled up to the shelter on 43rd Street. "You'll never survive on your own," she said, not even bothering to turn off the engine. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as if she might change her mind if she let go. But I knew better. When Mom made up her mind, that was it. I was 19. Old enough that she could legally wash her hands of me. Young enough that I had nowhere else to go after she'd isolated me from everyone who ever cared. My single duffel bag sat at my feet, containing everything I now owned in the world. "Mom, please," I said, my voice barely audible over the rattling heater. "We can figure something out." She wouldn't look at me. "You made your choice when you decided college wasn't for you. I'm not supporting someone who throws away their future." The irony was that I'd been accepted to 3 schools, but she'd refused to provide the financial information needed for aid applications. When I couldn't pay the deposits, she called it proof I wasn't serious about my education. "I'll get a job. I can pay rent," I pleaded, knowing it was useless but unable to stop myself. We'd had this conversation a dozen times in the past week, since she'd announced I had until the end of the month to either enroll in the nursing program she'd chosen or get out. "You won't last a week," she scoffed, finally turning to look at me. Her eyes, so similar to mine in shape and color, held nothing I recognized as maternal. "You've never had to struggle for anything." I almost laughed at that. My entire life had been a struggle. To earn her approval, to predict her moods, to make myself small enough not to trigger her rage. I'd worked part-time since I was 16, but every dollar went into the family account she controlled. "Take it," she said, thrusting a $20 bill at me. "That's more than my mother ever gave me." The shelter loomed behind me, a converted church with peeling paint and barred windows. I'd never been inside a place like this. What would happen to me here? The fear must have shown on my face because she added, "They'll kick you out in 30 days. When that happens, you'll realize I was right." I took a deep breath and grabbed my bag. "Goodbye, Mom." I didn't cry until the taillights of her car disappeared around the corner. Then I stood there, tears freezing on my cheeks, before forcing myself to turn around and walk up those cracked concrete steps into a future I couldn't imagine. The woman at the intake desk was named Gloria. Plump, with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a tight bun, she barely looked up from her paperwork as I approached. I later learned she'd seen thousands like me, young, scared, alone. One more wasn't going to ruffle her. "Name?" she asked, sliding a form across the scarred wooden desk. "Ellie. Ellie Summers." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and distant. "ID?" I fumbled in my pocket for my wallet, grateful my mother hadn't demanded that too. Gloria studied my driver's license, then me. Whatever she saw made her expression soften slightly. "First time homeless?" I nodded, embarrassed by the tears threatening to spill again. "It's temporary," she said firmly. "Remember that. Everything is temporary." The intake process was a blur of forms and questions. Did I have any medical conditions? No. Any substance abuse issues? No. Any income? No. Any family I could contact? The irony of that question made me bite the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. "You'll be in room 3, Gloria finally said, handing me a thin towel, a bar of soap, and a pamphlet of rules. "Breakfast is at 6:30. Curfew is 9 p.m. Don't miss either." Room 3 turned out to be a dormitory-style space with 8 metal frame beds. 3 were already occupied by women of varying ages, all watching me with the wary eyes of people who've learned not to trust newcomers. I chose a bed in the corner, as far from the others as possible, and sat down on the thin mattress. The springs creaked under my weight. I placed my duffel bag between my feet and stared at the wall, trying to process how my life had changed so completely in a matter of hours. "First night's the hardest," said a voice. I turned to see a woman in her 30s sitting on the next bed over. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore a faded Chicago Bears sweatshirt. "I'm Tanya," she continued when I didn't respond. "Been here 2 weeks." "Ellie," I managed. I don't know what I'm doing." Tanya nodded as if this made perfect sense. None of us do it first, but you figure it out quick or you don't make it. My mother says I won't last a week, I admitted, the words burning my throat. Mothers, Tanya said, and somehow that single word contained volumes. Look, the main thing is to get a job. Any job. The shelter gives you 30 days, but they'll extend it if you're working and saving. Show them you're trying. It was the first practical advice anyone had given me, and I clung to it like a lifeline. Where do I even start? Job Center opens at 8 tomorrow morning, down the hall from the cafeteria. They've got listings, computers you can use, sometimes even interview clothes you can borrow. She reached under her bed and pulled out a plastic container. You need a place to keep your valuables. They'll assign you a locker tomorrow, but for tonight you can put anything important in here with mine. I've got room. I stared at her, trying to understand why this stranger would help me when my own mother had thrown me away like garbage. Thank you, I whispered, taking out my wallet and the small jewelry box containing the only necklace I owned, a silver pendant with a tiny sapphire that had belonged to my grandmother. Get some sleep, Tanya advised. Tomorrow's when the real work begins. She was right. The next morning, after a breakfast I barely touched, I found myself in the job center, staring at a bulletin board covered in help-wanted flyers. Most were for minimum wage positions, fast food, retail, cleaning services. I had no real skills, no college education, nothing that would qualify me for anything better, but I thought of my mother's words, "You won't last a week," and felt something harden inside me. I would prove her wrong. I had to. The job counselor, a retired teacher named Mr. Wilson, helped me create a basic resume. It looked pathetically empty on the page. High school education, a part-time job at a grocery store during school. But it was something. There's a coffee shop 3 blocks down that's hiring, he said, circling a flyer. They need someone for the early morning shift. Not many people want to start at 5 a.m., but if you're staying here, you're up anyway. I nodded. I can do that. And this cleaning service needs evening help at office buildings downtown. The pay isn't great, but they don't ask many questions either. 2 jobs. I would need 2 jobs to afford even the cheapest apartment in Chicago. But what else could I do? I spent the rest of the day walking from place to place, filling out applications, smiling at managers who barely glanced at my resume before filing it away. By evening, my feet were blistered in the only pair of shoes I owned, not designed for miles of walking, but I'd secured an interview at the coffee shop for the next morning. That night, lying on my shelter bed listening to the sounds of women snoring, crying, and whispering around me, I made myself a promise. I would not only survive this, I would find a way to thrive. And someday, somehow, I would make sure no one else had to feel what I was feeling right now. The coffee shop hired me on the spot. The manager, a harried woman named Denise, looked relieved when I said I could start tomorrow. 5 a.m. to noon, Monday through Friday, she confirmed. We'll start you at minimum wage, but if you're reliable, we can talk about a raise in 3 months. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. I called the cleaning service from the shelter's phone and scheduled an interview for that afternoon. By sunset, I had secured my second job, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., cleaning offices in a downtown high-rise. You got 2 jobs your first day? Gloria looked impressed when I reported back at the shelter. That's unusual. I felt a tiny spark of pride. I need to save enough for an apartment before my time here is up. Working 16 hours a day is going to burn you out fast, she warned. I don't have a choice. Gloria studied me for a moment, then sighed. There's a program we sometimes recommend. Shared housing for working women. It's cheaper than getting your own place, and they offer 6-month leases instead of year-long ones. Might be a good stepping stone. She wrote down an address and a name. Housing Transitions, Sarah Michaels. Tell Sarah I sent you. She might be able to get you on the wait list. That night, exhausted but unable to sleep, I calculated what I would need to survive. Minimum wage at both jobs, minus taxes. Roughly $1,400 a month if I worked every available shift. The shared housing program might cost $600 a month, leaving $800 for everything else. Food, transportation, clothes, saving for the future. It wasn't much, but it was possible. I thought of my mother, probably sitting in our comfortable suburban home, perhaps even in my old room, convinced I was failing. The image no longer brought tears, only a cold determination. I would show her. Not just that I could survive, but that I could build something meaningful from the ashes she'd left me in. The reality of working 2 jobs while living in a shelter was brutal. I woke at 4 a.m. to get to the coffee shop by 5, spent 7 hours on my feet serving increasingly demanding customers, then had a few hours to search for more stable housing, or take naps on my shelter bed before heading to my evening cleaning job. By the time I returned to the shelter at 10:30 p.m., I barely had energy to shower before collapsing into sleep. But there was something empowering about earning my own money, even if it wasn't much. Each paycheck felt like a small victory against my mother's prediction of failure. After 2 weeks, I had enough saved to buy a secondhand phone. Nothing fancy, just a basic model that would allow potential employers to contact me. The number was mine alone, not controlled by anyone else. "Smart move," Tanya said when she saw it. "Having your own phone makes you look more stable to landlords, too." Tanya had become something of a mentor to me, dispensing advice gained from her own hard experiences. She'd lost her apartment after a medical emergency drained her savings, a sobering reminder of how fragile financial security could be. "Have you called about that shared housing program?" she asked one evening as we sat on our respective beds, me massaging my aching feet, her mending a tear in her work uniform. I nodded. "I'm on the wait list. They said it might be a month or 2. "Too long," Tanya frowned. "You need to be looking at other options, too. 30 days goes fast." She was right. I was already halfway through my allotted time at the shelter. Despite working every shift offered to me, I still didn't have enough saved for first and last month's rent plus security deposit, the standard requirement for most apartments. The next morning, as I was arranging pastries in the display case at the coffee shop, I overheard a conversation that would change everything. "It's just sitting empty," a woman in a business suit was saying to her companion. "My grandmother's been in assisted living for 6 months, and we can't decide whether to sell the condo or keep it in the family." "Property taxes must be killing you," her friend commented. "And condo fees. Plus, we're paying someone to check on it every week, make sure the pipes haven't burst or anything. It's becoming a money pit." I shouldn't have been eavesdropping, but something made me speak up as I handed them their change. "Excuse me, but have you considered hiring a property manager? Or maybe a caretaker?" The woman looked surprised. "For one condo? Seems excessive." "Not necessarily," I said, my heart pounding. "Someone could live there, maintain it, maybe pay a reduced rent that would cover your condo fees. Better than leaving it empty." The woman studied me curiously. "You sound like you know something about this." I took a deep breath. "Actually, I'm looking for housing myself. I'm reliable, employed, and I would treat your grandmother's place with respect." The words tumbled out before I could second-guess myself. "I could send you references from my employers." I was sure she would laugh or walk away. Instead, she reached into her purse and handed me a business card. "Interesting proposition. Email me your information. I'm Caroline Benton." That night, I spent 2 precious hours at the shelter's computer, crafting an email to Caroline, attaching references from both my current jobs, and explaining my situation as honestly as I dared. I didn't mention my mother directly, just said I was working to establish independence and financial stability. 3 days later, Caroline invited me to meet her at the condo, a modest 1-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, nothing fancy but clean and well-maintained. Her grandmother's furniture was still there, covered in sheets. "Here's the deal," Caroline said after showing me around. "The condo fees are $300 a month, property taxes another $200. I'll rent it to you for $600. Utilities included if you agree to keep it in good condition and allow a monthly inspection. Month-to-month lease, since we may eventually sell." It was less than half the market rate for a similar apartment. I could barely believe my luck. "There's one more thing," Caroline added. "My grandmother left a lot of her things here. If you're willing to help sort through them, donate what's usable, discard what's not, I'll waive the security deposit." I agreed immediately. That weekend, I signed the lease and moved in with my single duffel bag. The contrast between my meager possessions and the fully furnished apartment was stark, but I didn't care. I had a door that locked, a bathroom I didn't have to share, and a quiet space to call my own. That first night, I sat on the covered sofa, overwhelmed by the silence and privacy. No snoring roommates, no institutional fluorescent lights, no need to guard my belongings. I allowed myself to cry then, not from sadness, but from relief and a budding sense of pride. 3 weeks after my mother had abandoned me, I had 2 jobs and an apartment. I was surviving. The next phase of my life settled into a grueling but manageable routine. I continued working both jobs, slowly building a small savings account. On weekends, I sorted through Caroline's grandmother's belongings, clothing, books, kitchen items, separating them into piles as instructed. It was tedious work, but I found myself drawn to the photos scattered throughout the apartment. They showed a woman aging through decades, always smiling, often surrounded by family. It was a visual record of a life well lived, something I had trouble imagining for myself. One Saturday, Caroline stopped by to check on my progress. She seemed impressed by how organized I'd been. "You've got a good eye for what's valuable and what's not," she commented, examining the sorted piles. "That's a rare skill." "I just try to think about what might be useful to someone else," I explained. "Like these cooking utensils. They're old but good quality. Someone starting out could use them." Caroline gave me a thoughtful look. "My grandmother would have liked you. She was practical that way too." As we continued going through items, I found a box of business documents in the back of a closet. "What should I do with these?" I asked, showing Caroline. She sifted through them quickly. "These are from my grandmother's business. She ran a small home goods store for almost 30 years before retiring." She handed me a faded photograph of a smiling older woman standing proudly in front of a storefront. "That's her on opening day. She owned her own business?" I couldn't keep the admiration from my voice. "Started it from scratch in her 40s after my grandfather died," Caroline said. "Everyone told her she was crazy to start over at that age, but she built it into something successful." She chuckled. "Grandma always said the best revenge against people who doubt you is to prove them wrong without ever mentioning their name." The words struck a chord deep within me. Wasn't that exactly what I was trying to do? Prove my mother wrong without giving her the satisfaction of knowing how deeply she'd hurt me? "What happened to the store?" I asked. "Sold it when she retired. The money helped pay for her assisted living," Caroline said. "She was always good with finances, taught me everything I know about business." "She sounds amazing." "She was," Caroline agreed, her expression softening. "Maybe that's why I responded to your email. You remind me of her a little, that same determined look." As the weeks passed, I settled more comfortably into my new life. I quit the cleaning job after finding a better-paying position as an administrative assistant at a small insurance office, a stroke of luck when one of the regular coffee shop customers mentioned they were hiring. The office job was Monday through Friday, 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., which meant I could keep my morning shift at the coffee shop. With 2 jobs that didn't exhaust me completely and stable housing, I finally had mental space to think about the future. One evening, about 4 months after moving into the condo, I received an unexpected call from Gloria at the shelter. "We have a young woman here," she said without preamble. "Situation similar to yours. Smart, willing to work, just needs a break. I thought of you because she's looking for a job, and I remembered you mentioning your coffee shop might be hiring." "They are, actually," I confirmed. "The afternoon shift supervisor just gave notice." "Would you be willing to meet with her? Maybe put in a good word if she seems right for it." I thought about the night I'd arrived at the shelter, how lost and terrified I'd felt. "Yes, I'll meet her tomorrow." The young woman's name was Zoe. She was barely 18, kicked out by her stepfather after her mother died. Despite everything she'd been through, she had a quiet dignity that reminded me of myself just months earlier. I not only recommended her to Denise at the coffee shop, I also helped her navigate the job application and housing resources that had been so overwhelming to me initially. When she got the job, the look of relief and gratitude on her face awakened something in me, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt before. Over the next few months, Gloria called me several more times about other women needing job leads or advice. I never turned her down. Something about helping others find their footing made my own struggles seem more meaningful. I began to wonder if there was a way to make this kind of assistance more systematic, more effective. Around the 6-month mark of living in Caroline's grandmother's condo, I'd saved enough to start taking night classes in business administration at the community college. It was exhausting adding school to my already full schedule, but the concepts fascinated me, particularly social entrepreneurship, the idea of building businesses that solved social problems while generating profit. "You're quite interested in the shelter model," my economics professor noted after I'd asked yet another question about sustainable funding for social services. "Any particular reason?" I hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "I was in a shelter once. It saved me, but I saw many ways it could have been more effective." Instead of the pity I expected, he looked intrigued. "Have you considered doing a case study? It could be excellent material for your final project." That suggestion led me to approach Gloria about interviewing shelter residents and staff for my assignment. She agreed, and over the next few weeks, I documented the challenges faced by both the shelter itself, perpetually underfunded, understaffed, and limited in the services it could offer, and the women who passed through its doors. The patterns were clear. Most women needed 3 things to escape homelessness: affordable housing, employment that paid a living wage, and support systems to help them navigate crises. The shelter provided temporary housing but struggled with the other elements. What if, I wondered, there was a model that addressed all 3 simultaneously? The idea began to form in my mind: a business that would employ shelter residents, provide transitional housing, and offer financial education, all while generating enough revenue to sustain itself. It seemed impossibly ambitious, especially for someone like me who was still building her own stability. But once the concept took root, I couldn't let it go. One evening, as I was organizing the last of Caroline's grandmother's papers, I came across a folder I hadn't seen before. Inside was a business plan, yellowed with age but meticulously detailed, for the home goods store. Reading through it, I was struck by how practical and straightforward it was. This woman hadn't had an MBA or special connections. She'd simply identified a need, calculated costs and revenues, and taken a leap of faith. If she could do it, I whispered to myself, why not me? The next morning, I called Caroline. "I've been thinking about what happens when you eventually sell the condo. I should start looking for another place." "No rush," she assured me. "We're not listing it anytime soon." "I appreciate that, but I've been here almost 7 months. It's time I found something more permanent." I took a deep breath. "Actually, I wanted to ask you something else. Would you be willing to look at a business plan I'm developing? Your grandmother's documents have been incredibly helpful, but I'd value your perspective." There was a pause on the line. "A business plan? For what?" "A social enterprise focused on helping women transition out of homelessness," I explained. "It's still very preliminary, but—" "Send it over," Caroline interrupted. "I'd be happy to review it. And Ellie? My grandmother would be thrilled that her papers inspired you." As I hung up, I felt a surge of determination stronger than anything I'd experienced before. My mother had abandoned me, convinced I would fail on my own. 7 months later, I was not only surviving but beginning to envision a future where I could help others do the same. The path ahead would be difficult, full of obstacles I couldn't yet imagine, but for the first time, I believed in my ability to overcome them. And in that moment, the cold November day when my mother left me at the shelter seemed not like an ending, but the first page of a story I was still writing, one with a much different conclusion than she had predicted. As my business plan took shape, I realized I needed more education and resources than I currently had. My community college classes were helpful, but insufficient for what I was trying to build. I needed mentors, connections, and access to startup funding. Caroline proved to be an unexpected ally. After reviewing my preliminary business plan, she invited me to lunch at her downtown office. I arrived feeling out of place in my best thrift store outfit, clutching a folder of notes. "This concept has potential," she said after we'd ordered. "The idea of combining transitional housing with employment training is solid, but you need to refine the financial projections." "I know," I admitted. "The numbers don't quite work yet." "Actually, they're closer than you might think." She slid a business card across the table. "This is my friend Mira. She runs a nonprofit incubator program. They provide mentorship and seed funding for social enterprises. The application deadline for their next cohort is next month." I stared at the card. Do you think I have a chance? Caroline's expression was thoughtful. Your background is your strongest asset here, Ellie. You've lived this problem. That gives you insights others don't have. That night, I began working on the application, pouring every spare moment into refining my concept. I called it Threshold, a business that would employ women from shelters to create home goods while providing housing and financial education. The products would be sold online and through partnerships with local retailers, generating revenue to sustain operations. 2 weeks before the application was due, Carolyn called with news that changed everything. My grandmother passed away last night, she said, her voice tight with emotion, peacefully, in her sleep. I'm so sorry, I said, meaning it deeply. Though I'd never met the woman, I felt I knew her through her possessions and papers. There's something else, Caroline continued. She left instructions about the condo. She wanted it to be used for someone who needs a fresh start. That's you, Ellie. If you want it. I couldn't process what she was saying. But it must be worth about $180,000, yes. But she was very specific. It's not to be sold unless absolutely necessary. It's meant to be used by someone building a new life. There was a pause. The family agrees you're the right person. We'd transfer ownership to a trust, with conditions that it be used for housing someone in transition for at least 10 years. I sat down hard on the sofa, her grandmother's sofa. I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept, Caroline urged, and that you'll keep working on that business plan. With a stable home secured in a way I never could have imagined, I threw myself completely into developing Threshold. The nonprofit incubator accepted my application, and suddenly I was part of a cohort of 10 social entrepreneurs, each working to address different community needs. Mira, the program director, became my primary mentor. A former corporate executive who'd switched to the nonprofit sector in her 40s, she was brutally honest but unfailingly supportive. Your model needs a stronger revenue stream, she told me during one of our sessions. Home goods are competitive, with low margins. What else could your business produce that would command higher prices? I thought about the women I'd met at the shelter, their diverse skills and backgrounds. Custom services, maybe? Design work? Specialized products? Keep thinking, Mira encouraged. Find the intersection of what these women can offer and what customers will pay premium prices for. The breakthrough came during a conversation with Zoe, who was now a shift manager at the coffee shop and taking classes in graphic design. What if we focused on corporate gifts? She suggested. Companies spend a fortune on custom items for clients and events. If we positioned ourselves as a social enterprise, they could fulfill corporate social responsibility goals while getting quality products. It was brilliant. Corporate clients had larger budgets, valued the social impact story, and could provide the steady orders we would need to maintain stable employment for our program participants. With this refined focus, our business plan finally clicked. Threshold would still provide transitional housing and employment for women from shelters, but our primary revenue would come from producing custom corporate gift packages with a secondary line of retail home goods. The incubator program culminated in a pitch competition, where each entrepreneur presented to a room full of potential investors and donors. As I stood at the podium, I felt a momentary flash of fear. Who was I to be here? A formerly homeless woman with no business background, proposing to solve a problem experts had struggled with for decades. But then I remembered Caroline's grandmother, starting a business in her 40s. I thought of Gloria at the shelter, doing what she could with limited resources. I thought of Tanya, Zoe, and all the women still cycling through shelter beds with no clear path forward. My name is Ellie Summers, I began. 9 months ago, my mother dropped me at a homeless shelter, telling me I wouldn't last a week on my own. Today, I'm here to present a sustainable business model that will help other women prove their doubters wrong. The room was silent as I walked through the Threshold concept, explaining how our model addressed the 3 key barriers to stability: housing, employment, and support systems. When I finished, the questions were tough but engaged. These people weren't dismissing me, they were taking me seriously. Threshold won second place in the competition, which came with a $25,000 grant. More importantly, 3 investors approached me afterward, interested in providing additional funding. One of them, a woman named Rebecca Winters, had a particularly personal reaction. My mother was homeless for a period when I was in college, she told me. The system failed her in exactly the ways you described. I've been looking for an initiative like this to support. She handed me her card. Let's discuss how I can help scale this beyond just one location. With Rebecca's investment and the grant money, Threshold launched 6 months later. We started small, 4 program participants living in 2 apartments, including the condo that had once been my own fresh start. Our workshop occupied a subsidized space in a community business center, where we produced our first line of corporate gift boxes. It wasn't always smooth. One participant relapsed into addiction and had to leave the program. Another struggled with showing up on time. Our first major order came in late because of production issues. There were moments when I wondered if my mother had been right, if I was in over my head, destined to fail. But for every setback, there was progress. Zoe became our first full-time employee, heading up design. Tanya, who had skills in financial management I hadn't known about, came on board to help participants with budgeting and saving. Our corporate clients began reordering, impressed by both our products and our mission. 3 years after my mother left me at that shelter, Threshold had grown to 3 locations across Chicago, housing and employing 27 women. We had expanded into a proper production facility, with clients including several Fortune 500 companies headquartered in the city. I had my own apartment now, having moved out of the condo to make room for new program participants. My salary was modest but sufficient. I could have paid myself more, but every dollar felt better invested back into expanding our services. Gloria had retired from the shelter, but served on our advisory board. Caroline remained a close friend and advocate, introducing us to potential corporate clients through her business network. It was Caroline who first suggested I share our story more widely. You should speak at conferences, Ellie. Other cities could replicate this model. The idea made me uncomfortable. I'm not looking for recognition. This isn't about you, she pointed out. It's about scaling impact. Think about all the women in shelters across the country who could benefit from programs like Threshold. She was right, of course. Our model was working, showing promising outcomes not just in helping women find stability, but in maintaining it. Our 3-year retention rate, participants still employed and independently housed, was over 80%, far higher than traditional shelter-to-housing programs. So I began accepting speaking engagements, sharing the Threshold model with audiences of nonprofit leaders, government officials, and impact investors. Each time I told our story, people approached afterward wanting to implement similar programs in their communities. One evening, after speaking at a housing conference in Minneapolis, I returned to my hotel room to find an email from a name I didn't recognize, Sarah Summers. The subject line read simply, "It's your mother." My hands trembled as I opened it. "I saw you on the local news tonight speaking about your organization," it read. "I almost didn't recognize you. You look confident. I've been following your success from a distance. I want you to know I was wrong. You've done more than survive. If you're ever willing to talk, my number is below." I sat for a long time staring at that message, feeling a complex storm of emotions. There was no apology. Not really. Just an acknowledgement that she had been wrong about me. 5 years earlier, that might have meant everything. Now it felt strangely hollow. I didn't reply that night, or the next day. I had a full schedule of meetings with local foundations interested in funding Threshold affiliates in their cities. My work felt more important than reopening old wounds. On my flight back to Chicago, I thought about what I would say if I did call her. Would I tell her about the nights I'd cried myself to sleep in the shelter? About the blisters on my feet from walking miles between jobs? About the fear and loneliness? Or would I tell her about Caroline's grandmother, who'd never met me but changed my life through her generosity? About Gloria and Tanya and Zoe, who'd offered help when they had little to spare themselves? About the community that had formed around Threshold, proving that people could lift each other up instead of tearing each other down? By the time the plane landed, I knew I wouldn't call. Not because I couldn't forgive her, but because I didn't need her acknowledgement anymore. The angry, frightened girl standing outside that shelter with $20 in her pocket wasn't who I was now. Instead, I channeled that energy into our expansion plans. If my mother's email had any effect, it was to strengthen my resolve to reach more women who had been discarded by those who should have supported them. Within the next 2 years, Threshold expanded to Detroit and Milwaukee, partnering with existing shelters to implement our model. Each location operated somewhat independently, adapted to local needs and opportunities, but shared our core approach of combining housing, employment, and comprehensive support. The 5th anniversary of Threshold's founding coincided with the opening of our 10th location. What had begun as a desperate idea born in a borrowed condo had grown into a network spanning 5 states, serving over 300 women annually. Our corporate gift line had expanded to include custom clothing, promotional items, and specialty foods, all produced by program participants earning living wages with benefits. The celebration was held in our original workshop space, now used primarily for training. Women from all our programs attended, along with corporate partners, donors, and community leaders. Gloria, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, sat in the front row. Caroline was there with her family. Tanya, Zoe, and many others who had been with us since the early days moved through the crowd, sharing stories and laughter. As I prepared to address the gathering, I found myself thinking about metrics and milestones. We tracked so many numbers now: retention rates, income levels, housing stability, children impacted. All important, all telling a story of incremental positive change. But the true impact wasn't in the statistics. It was in the woman at the refreshment table who had been living in her car 8 months ago and was now supervising production for our largest client. It was in the former participant who had saved enough to open her own business and now hired women from our program. It was in the children who had stable homes and mothers with growing confidence and resources. 5 years ago, I began my speech. I stood in a shelter much like the ones many of you have experienced, convinced my life was over before it had really begun. Today, I look around this room and see not just what Threshold has become, but what each of you has built with your own courage and determination. I spoke about our plans for the future, expanding to 5 more cities in the coming year, launching a microloan program for graduates interested in entrepreneurship, developing more comprehensive childcare solutions. But tonight isn't about where we're going, I concluded. It's about acknowledging how far we've all come. Every woman in this room has proven someone wrong, a parent, a partner, a system that said you weren't enough. Tonight, we celebrate that victory, and the countless more to come. The applause was deafening. As I stepped away from the podium, Gloria caught my eye and gave me a small, knowing nod. She, more than anyone, understood the journey from that first night in the shelter to this moment. After the formal program ended, I found myself surrounded by women wanting to share their stories with me, how Threshold had changed their trajectory, what they planned to do next. Each conversation filled me with a sense of purpose stronger than any personal achievement could have. Later, as the crowd thinned, Caroline approached with an envelope. "I've been saving this for a special occasion," she said. "Tonight seems right." Inside was a photograph of her grandmother standing in front of her store on its opening day, looking proud and determined. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "To whoever comes next, build something that matters." "She would have loved what you've created," Caroline said softly. The next morning, I woke early despite the late celebration. It had become my habit to start each day reviewing our organization's needs and opportunities. But today, something different was on my mind. I pulled out my laptop and searched for homeless shelter statistics. The numbers were staggering and heartbreaking. Despite all our efforts, all the organizations working on this issue, there were still over 500,000 people experiencing homelessness in America on any given night. More than a third were women and children. Many were fleeing violence, others were caught in cycles of poverty and lack of opportunity. Threshold was helping hundreds, but what about the hundreds of thousands we couldn't reach? That question led me to a decision that would shape the next chapter of our organization. We needed to think bigger, beyond direct service. We needed to change systems. I called Rebecca, our earliest investor who had become a close advisor. "I want to create a foundation," I told her. "Something separate from but connected to Threshold. Its purpose would be to fund other organizations implementing our model, advocate for policy changes, and conduct research on what really works." "That's ambitious," she said, but I could hear the interest in her voice. "What would you call it?" I thought for a moment. "Cornerstone, because stable housing is the foundation for everything else." Within 6 months, the Cornerstone Foundation launched with initial funding from Rebecca and several other major donors who had seen the success of the Threshold model. Its mission was threefold: to provide grants and technical assistance to organizations serving homeless women, to advocate for policies addressing the root causes of homelessness, and to conduct research on effective intervention strategies. As Threshold continued to expand its direct service locations, Cornerstone began funding similar programs in cities we hadn't yet reached. We developed a comprehensive training program to help traditional shelters transition to our model of combined housing, employment, and support. 8 years after my mother had left me at that shelter, convinced I would fail, I stood before a congressional committee testifying about the economic and social costs of homelessness and the proven interventions that could address it. The question isn't whether we can afford to solve this problem, I told them. It's whether we can afford not to. Every woman who remains trapped in homelessness represents not just a personal tragedy, but lost potential, lost productivity, and increased public costs. The legislation we were supporting, which would expand funding for transitional housing programs and employment initiatives, passed with bipartisan support. It wasn't a complete solution, but it was a meaningful step forward. That evening, as I flew back to Chicago, I reflected on how far both I and our organization had come. Threshold now operated in 22 cities across 12 states. Cornerstone had funded programs reaching thousands more women. Together, they employed over 400 formerly homeless women and housed nearly 1,000. My phone chimed with a text from Zoe, who now served as Threshold's chief operating officer. "Saw your testimony. You knocked it out of the park. Gloria would have been proud." Gloria had passed away the previous year, but her influence remained strong in everything we did. We had established a scholarship in her name, providing educational opportunities for program participants. The first cohort of Gloria Scholars was graduating next month. As the plane began its descent into Chicago, I thought about the path that had led me here. My mother had been right about one thing. I hadn't survived on my own. No one does. It was the community I found, the people who believed in me before I fully believed in myself, who made the difference. That realization had shaped everything about how Threshold and Cornerstone operated. We weren't just providing services. We were creating communities where women could find the support and belonging that all humans need to thrive. 10 years to the day after being left at the shelter, I returned to that same building. It looked smaller than I remembered, the paint still peeling in places, but now there was a Threshold logo beside the entrance. It had become our 100th affiliated program, a full-circle moment that felt both poetic and practical. As I walked up those familiar concrete steps, I wasn't the scared 19-year-old with a single duffel bag anymore. I was a woman who had built something that mattered, something that would outlast me. Inside, the intake desk where I'd first met Gloria had been replaced with a welcoming reception area. The dormitory-style rooms had been converted to private spaces. The job center was now a state-of-the-art training facility. Women moved through the building with purpose, not desperation. And on the wall hung a simple plaque with words I had chosen myself. "You are not defined by how others see you, but by what you build from the pieces they leave behind." My mother never reached out again after that single email. I sometimes wondered what she thought when she saw news coverage of our work, if she connected the organization's success with the daughter she had discarded. But those thoughts came less frequently now, brief ripples in a life filled with more meaningful concerns. The truth was, I no longer needed her to see me. I had found my own way, created my own family of choice, built something that helped others find their paths as well. As I stood in the renovated shelter that had once been my lowest point, I felt a sense of completion. Not because the work was done, it was far from over, but because I had answered the question that had haunted me that first night. Would I survive this? Could I build a meaningful life from such a devastating beginning? The answer surrounded me in the faces of women who were asking themselves those same questions, finding their way toward their own answers. Some would go on to build businesses, others to reunite with children, still others to discover talents and passions long suppressed by circumstance. I couldn't guarantee their success any more than anyone could have guaranteed mine, but I could ensure they didn't face their challenges alone, as I had nearly done. I could help create the conditions where their strength and resilience could emerge. And perhaps that was the most powerful response to my mother's prediction. Not just that I had survived, but that I had created space for hundreds of others to do the same. Not a shelter, but a threshold. a crossing place from one life to another, better one. That night, as I left the building, a young woman was arriving, clutching a backpack, her face tight with fear and uncertainty. Our eyes met briefly as we passed on the steps. I didn't know her story, but I recognized that look, the one that asked if this was the end or a beginning. "Welcome," I said simply. "You're going to be okay." And in that moment, the circle closed, not with revenge or vindication, but with the quiet knowledge that some broken things, when mended, become stronger at the seams. Some painful endings make way for more beautiful beginnings, and sometimes, proving someone wrong is less about them and more about discovering who you were meant to be all along.